Coming from Atlanta, Sherra Bell has transitioned to being a career and business development for creative professionals, and that's me. I think that's all of you. So we're going to hopefully we'll be able to pay our bills more efficiently and get some profit into our system and learn a lot from Sherra Bell. So without further ado, Sherra, thank you. Oh, yes.
Thank you. So as I said earlier, my goal today is for this to be a conversation. There's certainly things I'll share with you, but I wanted to start with a story. Recently I went to a design conference, and there were some amazing designers giving keynotes. And I was taken aback because from the stage, these very talented designers talking about amazing work they were doing, talked about how little money they were making. And I thought, if our best and brightest who are on the stage are talking about how little money they make, what's happening to everybody else, right? And I was at the time giving a talk called Name Your Niche, where I was talking to everybody about, how there's more money in being micro-niched and knowing your specialty and knowing your market. And I realized that there was a conversation before that needed to happen, which was, how do you feel about money? And what does money mean to you? What does having more money mean to you? Or what does having more time sometimes? Time and money are sort of the trade we make when we're negotiating. And so that's how I came up with this talk. I've given it in San Antonio was first place and Austin is a second, and you guys are my third. So I've been a president of AIGA. I was president of AIGA Atlanta from 2005 to 2007. And as I said earlier, I've been involved in AIGA since longer than I'd like to admit. When I was in college, and AIGA has my heart. So I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that you guys made time for me. The conversation I had with Chris started about a week ago, and we managed to pull this event together very quickly. And so just because I was going to be here, and it was a chance to get to be with you. So I appreciate getting to be here with you. We've talked a little about some of the things you want to talk about, but I want to start with what goals have you set for yourself in 2019? So in talking with you, I found some of you talked about maybe new jobs, maybe negotiating learning now so you negotiate your next job and the money in your next job better. We talked about clients and learning to present our work in a way that it's packaged and priced in a way that people aren't trying to knock you down on your hours or get you to work more hours for no money, because can you just do this one thing, right? This won't take long. You can just do that. You don't have to charge me for that, do you? But also this idea of what I find most designers do is the referrals, right? Most people depend on word of mouth. And what I want to do is to get you comfortable at least with the possibility of the idea that it might be okay to proactively sell yourself, and to give you some ideas and suggestions about how that might work for you. And that works for you whether you're looking for a full-time job or whether you're looking for freelance clients or a little combination of both. And it starts with you having really clear intentions, which is where the title of this talk came from. I was involved in some personal development work for years, and their mantra was intentions equal results. And that the corollary of that was results equal intentions. So that whatever had shown up in your world, in some way, consciously or subconsciously, you had intended. So if you didn't get paid as much as you wanted in a job, that there was an intention, even subconsciously, around not feeling valued or not trusting in your value. And it's when you shift those intentions, it's when you get to that place of I know that I'm valuable, and you're confident and clear about that, everybody else gets confident and clear about your value. And I find with most of the designers that I work with that that's where they struggle the most, is they're not clear, so their customers aren't clear. And now the negotiations are murky. And sometimes it shows up in the way contracts are written and the details that are left out of agreements around change orders and things like that. And sometimes it shows up in the original pricing and the sort of what you settle for just to get the work, right? How often have you taken something because you felt like, I just need the work right now, so if they'll pay me, that's what I'll take. And so today is all about just it's a little bit mindset, not woo-woo mindset, but mindset in terms of, if I can leave you with anything today, my goal is that you just think differently about what you deserve and what you're capable of getting for yourselves. Does that feel like a good thing to talk about today? Okay, so tell me where you're starting from. We talked a little bit about some of the issues that sort of where your issues are, but let's talk about your belief about money. How did you learn to negotiate?
It's silly, but reality shows about real estate.
Oh, okay.
I mean, sometimes they have some very helpful tips and tricks, but it's not quite applicable to the same scenario.
Sure.
Not going to negotiate about work versus a house or getting someone, but I learned that the idea is you can get them to come up. You shouldn't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably where I lack the intention and the confidence.
Okay. And I'm supposed to be repeating stuff, aren't I? So this is
Real estate.
learning about real estate on reality TV shows. Any of you watch Shark Tank? I always love the negotiations on Shark Tank, right? Like how quickly they put somebody in their place about not knowing their value or being unrealistic about their value, right? Because it works both ways. You can not know your value and be too low, or you can not know your value, your actual value, and be on the top end of that and kill a sale or kill an investment because you weren't educated enough, right? You talked about reading. So for those that weren't here yet, there's a book I didn't even know about that I'm now adding to my list, which is Nail It, which is around negotiation for designers. So if that's not on your list, I would add it to your list. Did any of you have parents that taught you to negotiate? Yeah? One of the designers that negotiated the best with me when I was still recruiting, his dad had raised him from a very young age to negotiate. And he blew me away in his he was a creative director, and he blew me away in his negotiations. And I'm like, and so my question was, where did you learn to negotiate like that, right? And the placement that I put him in was originally, the client had come to me and wanted a $65,000 art director that would make things look pretty. And he was starting an agency, and I knew that he was going to need more than that, right? And so I had been educating the business owner along the way and giving him higher caliber talent on contract and getting him used to what really great design could do. And then we got this creative director that he really wanted to hire, and he came in with an offer of $85K. And the creative director said, I am not even having this conversation for less than 6 figures. Now I've had to get this client from $65,000 already. Now I've got to get him to pay this guy at least 6 figures. But he dug his heels in because he knew his value, right? And then the client knew his value because we'd been building that value along the way in the process. And the client made an offer that the candidate could accept. And the candidate is now a partner in the business, right? He's been there now for 10 years. The business is now built around his talent. Had he taken a job below what he knew he was valued and hated it, everybody would have lost in that scenario, correct? But by him holding his ground and knowing his value, everybody got to win. And that's the way I want you to be thinking about negotiation. It's not a win-lose proposition. You're not hurting somebody by holding your ground and knowing your value. You're establishing the value of what you do, which helps you, it helps the industry. That was in my little write-up of this, right? When you know your value, you help everybody in this room because the value of design goes up. And AIGA has been having this conversation about the value of design for decades at this point, right? I was a president in 2005, 2007, and so, we were in the middle of the conversation then. And one of my big beliefs is that design is not valuable until designers know how to sell their value, right? The moment designers get really confident in selling value, everybody else will understand not the generic value of design, but the I have to pay for great design piece, right? And the market's still catching up with that. The market will always push back on your value because the people who are negotiating with you are trained to try to get the most out of you for the least amount possible, right? That's their job. Your job is to get the most amount of value for the least amount of effort possible, right? And so there's a balance that you're always striking. When I was recruiting, or when I recruit, I still recruit some, but it's very limited. My job is always to hold space in the middle and try to find that place that you're getting as much as possible and they're paying as little as possible. And we're finding where that middle ground is that everybody gets to win, right? And it's always, somebody was talking about pricing earlier, it's always a value-based negotiation. It's always looking at what is the long-term value in what it is that you're selling. So what do you know in your mind do you know what you made in 2018? Is everybody really clear on what they made in 2018?
I have a question.
Yes.
So you're talking about value, I saying know your worth.
Mm-hmm.
Told people in different industries like know your worth, know what you're worth.
Uh-huh.
Secrets your value. How do you figure out what your value is?
We're going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But let's start first with where you're starting from. So you don't have to tell me what you made last year, but just do you know in your head, if you're freelance, sometimes people don't know. Do you know in your head how much you made last year? And if you don't, will you promise me that you'll go home and in the next week figure that out? Because you got to know where you're starting from. And then, do you know what you want to make this year? Do you have a clear goal about what you want to make in 2019? Does everybody have a clear goal? Okay. No, not yet. I'm going to encourage you to have a clear goal about what you want to make in 2019, because as we talk about your pricing and value stuff, that's going to be a really important number for you to know. And then if it's different than what you made in 2018, then we've got to be thinking about how you're going to make up that difference, right? And then around that, like, what else is included in your more? When you negotiate for a job, you've got vacation and time off and remote working. When you're talking to clients, what are some of the things that you're considering when you're pricing in terms of how you decide how much a job is going to cost? There's material costs. There's PITA cost. Are they going to be a pain in the butt, right? Like, there's an upcharge for being a pain, right? There's how fast of a turnaround they want and whether or not you're going to have to pull an all-nighter to pull off the deadline that they wanted. What else? Am I forgetting anything else? What else would you consider as your pricing?
Travel.
Travel, yeah. Travel and expenses. How much time they're going to want from you, like meeting time and all of that versus you being at home in front of the computer working on your stuff. Anything else? Uh-huh.
What I've heard is the value that you're providing to them.
And then the value, yes. And so what is it that this is going to deliver for them in long-term value, right? We've all heard the story about the Nike logo, right? It was at $15 or something really silly for a logo that now stands for a brand. And then later getting paid. But that story is always really interesting to me because the getting paid after the fact is almost like a benefactor, right? It wasn't negotiated as a licensing thing of how successful this will be depends on how much you get paid, right? But at some point, Nike got shamed into going back to the designer and going, okay, here's some extra money. But it was really more like, here's a gift, right? Getting paid for your work isn't a gift, right? Getting paid for your work is about the value of what you're delivering. But if you don't know the value, then how can they know the value, right? So let's talk a little bit about how profit plays into the mindset of how you think about money, right? So one of the mistakes I see a lot of designers make is they're just trying to figure out how to break even on a project, right? I hear this all the time from some of my clients where they get into a project and it's something they really want to do, and they're just trying to figure out how to make just enough money to make it worthwhile, right? And that's where, if you have in mind what it is you want to make for the course of the year, sometimes it saves you from yourself in terms of if you have goals you're trying to reach, you're going to hold on to this margin that you need. When I was in staffing, we had a margin we had to make, and if we didn't make that margin, we had to call on a particular project, we had to call the home office and ask for permission, right? So back in the day, in the high times of staffing and the internet boom, we would mark your work up 100%. Doesn't happen anymore, but we would, as a contractor, if you're working through an agency, we would mark you up 100%. And we had to call the home office if we were going to mark you up any less than 90%. Because they were looking every day at our margins and how much profit we were making. And it trained me to think about profit margins, not just how do I break even on something, right? And so it's not just your material costs. It's not just your hourly rate. Your clients should never know your hourly rate, right? That's one of the mistakes I think you get as a freelancer. You work on an hourly rate, so you get in the habit of then translating that and giving that to clients as a way to work. But then they start to calculate how many hours you should be working, right? They start to tell you how much time your work should take instead of you telling them. And that's a mindset shift for you as well as for them of it doesn't really matter how many hours I work if I get the job done and the job has this value. And one of the reasons I got out of recruiting is because recruiting's gotten very time-based. Everybody wants to hire a recruiter by the hour to source people. I've been building a network for 20-something years. I can recruit really fast. So should I get penalized because I can find you somebody in 5 hours that somebody else might take 25 hours to make? Like, how is that fair? And it's the same thing as a designer. As you get better and faster, should you get penalized because you're now better and faster and it doesn't take you as long? Or should you be rewarded for that in that now you're charging the same project price, but you're getting it done in half the time, right? And so giving yourself permission for that, I think, is that's the first thing you have to do. Sorry, I sort of skipped around on something. I talked with some of you, there's different kinds of revenue, right? So there's some of you that are fully freelance, fully business owners, right? So let's talk about there's some students in here. This is going to be basic for some of you, but for the students and the new grads, I want to run through a few things for you in this industry, right? So you can be an employee, working W-2, right? They're paying your taxes. They're taking your Social Security out, right? You could be a contractor. Sometimes you're W-2. Sometimes you're 1099, right? That's a really important thing to make sure you're paying attention to. Because one of the places most contractors get in trouble over is they're 1099 and they're charging a freelance rate that really should be a W-2. And then they get around to having to pay their taxes and now they haven't made any money, right? So making sure that you, in the negotiations for any kind of freelance project, you understand whether you're W-2 or 1099 when you're negotiating rate. Know that before you set a rate, especially if it's an hourly rate. Because if you negotiate a rate thinking you're W-2, and then they come back and tell you you're going to be 1099, you've agreed to a rate. Now you're going to make less money. And they will sometimes intentionally let you make this mistake because now they are saving the money that you're losing, right? So, and then if you're doing a combination of these two, you have to make sure that even though you're taking your taxes out here, that you're also taking your taxes out here. This will be the other place you get in trouble with from a profit standpoint, right? Is you didn't plan for your taxes on all this great 1099 money you were making through the year, and then at the end of the year, you're in pain, right? So if you're going to do contract work, have an accountant and know how you should be planning your taxes so that as you're planning for your profit, as you're intending for profit, you know how this money is being bucketed. And then you have the business stuff. How many of you are legal entities? You're an LLC? You're an LLC. Anybody else an LLC? If you're freelancing and you're making, I don't know, we were talking, how much you said?
I was thinking 6,000 or more a year, then you might want to get an LLC.
Yeah, I think that's a really good rule of thumb. That if your freelance business is gonna generate more than $6,000 a year, you want to have at least an LLC. And then as you're developing your business, you may want to consider an S corp or some other kind of entity, depending on the structure. But S corp or just LLC, sole proprietor. But in doing that legal entity, now you get some protection. That if a client were to sue you for something, they're not suing you personally, they're suing your business. And it gives you a little bit of legal separation. But when you're thinking about the money you make, the other piece that I see a lot of my designers then doing, are any of you developing your own products? Do you have a craft or something that, like, I have a friend who's a letterpress artist, so she's a designer, a freelance designer. Then she also has this letterpress company and does cards and really beautiful prints and things on the side that she sells on Etsy. I have one of my clients actually that's a Disney animator, and she's now developing a card line as well and some product line as a separate business. And so that is a way to create some passive income for yourself over time, is to have something that exists out there that you're getting residual revenue on, in addition to you showing up and doing something with your time. And so it becomes a good revenue stream for designers.
And that's a good point to make, because as self-employed people, as long as you are on the job, when you take a vacation, you don't get paid. So
Yeah.
you want to switch over to that business side quicker.
Yeah. And now it's even, like, now there's even other stuff, right? Now you can do coaching and, like, there's all kinds of other ways that you can take your thought leadership, right? And turn it into some piece of a side business or some kind of product that people can buy, or training. I know a lot of designers that train on Adobe Skills, or they're on Skillshare or whatever, but they have trainings people can buy around particular skills that they're really good at. And so it gives you just another way to think about the ways to make money, right? Not just showing up and doing a project for a client. So when you think about your goals for the year, I want you to think about them in a couple of ways. So think about all those different ways you could make money. And then I want you to think about breaking down, let's say you have I'm just going to pick a round number, right? So let's say you have a goal for making $100,000 this year, right? And maybe that's way off, but let's start there. And if last year you made 80,000, right? So we've got to figure out where an extra 20 comes from, looking at the idea of how many of your clients are going to stay and how many you're going to have to develop new, right? And the kind of average size of projects. What's an average size of a freelance project, or what's an average size of a project in, let's say, a branding project in Arizona? Anybody got an idea? I mean, Arizona. God, what state am I in today? In Las Vegas. Sorry, guys. Does anybody know?
Branding-wise, I would probably go with Greg Carnes, and he's probably around 35 to 5,000.
3,500 to 5,000.
Yeah.
What other kind of projects do you guys do besides Those that are freelance, what kind of work, what kind of projects do you typically do? Or not freelance, but
Sometimes key artwork for promotion.
promotions? Okay. So what's your average size project usually?
Sometimes a poster and then maybe 6 to 8 other supporting pieces that are advertising.
Okay. And generally speaking, is there an average price range that you're?
Yeah, and it's roughly about
Both are the same? Okay. What would a $10,000 project look like in this market? Or let me ask this, how long would that project, the $3,000 to $5,000 project, how long does that usually take you to execute on? Is that a month? Is that
For me, it's 3 to 4 days.
3 to 4 days?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that about right?
sometimes it could be a couple of weeks depending on what
Okay.
the workload looks like.
Okay. So these are pretty short projects. All right. So if you're talking about a 3-month long project, like if you were going to get a really strategic, a fairly strategic project, that you were going to go in and do some higher level development of an idea, a website, a rebranding, those kinds of things. Do you guys have a general idea of where that pricing is in this market? No? Okay. I'm going to say, I'm just going to go off Atlanta prices, and I'm going to have to do some comparison for you guys, but in Atlanta, most of my clients, I'm trying to get them to get to $10,000 projects, right? Because if you've got to sell this, and you could sell something at 10K, right? Now you got to sell half as many things, right? You sell once, you get twice as much. And so from an efficiency standpoint, the bigger your projects get, the less you have to sell. The harder they are to sell, but the less you have to sell, right? Whereas if you're doing a lot of these small projects, you've got to constantly be selling. If you're doing a project that only lasts a couple of weeks, then you're getting to that place where now next week you got to sell something else, and the next week you got to sell something else. And so part of in this intention to profit is to figure out how to make your projects bigger. And thinking about what does a bigger project in your area of expertise, in your ideal client market, like what does a bigger project look like? And then, obviously the goal is to sort of keep building that over time. So one of the things that I've been working with is this idea of you have an ideal project size in here that is usually about 3 months long, right? And again, somewhere in that sort of 10K kind of range. And if it's a 100K goal, then you need 10 of them, right? You can get a more strategic project that's like a year-long relationship with somebody where you might do multiple projects, right? Is your upsell. And then your downsell are the smaller projects, these sort of 3 to 5. You can't get them to buy something or an entry point kind of sell. And so you get this sort of 3 to 5K. And then over time, as you grow, what ends up happening is then this becomes your downsell, this becomes your middle sell, and then you've got another project that's even bigger as an upsell, right? And so you're constantly thinking about how you're going to grow. Does that make sense? Does anybody see where this is applicable to their work? Have you done this already in some way? You went from a $500 project to now you do only $1,000 projects, or now you only do $3,000 to $5,000 projects, right? That's sort of the natural progression. When you're first starting out, you might be taking $500 websites or $500 logos, but over time you want to be constantly figuring out how you're now going to move up to what the next thing is. And the next thing is it's more complex, it takes a little longer to execute, it takes a little more of your expertise, and it has a little more value to your client, right? So what the client values is not necessarily your time, but your expertise and your experience, right? And your job is to figure out how to constantly be developing that, right? How are you constantly now elevating what you can bring to your client? What are you learning? What are you learning from doing work for multiple clients like them, or other clients that are have solved that problem already, even if they're not your clients? but you're studying the market to figure out who's already solved a problem your client needs to solve. And how do you elevate what you're bringing to them more than just what they're asking for? And that's what the upsell really is about, is they may be coming to you and asking you for a $500 logo, but that's not really their problem, right? They just don't need a new logo. They're trying to solve some other kind of problem. And so your job is to figure out why they need your help, right? And so in the sales perspective, what we're looking at is this idea of what is the pain that they're trying to solve when you're having the conversation. And so they think the pain is they need a new logo. But your job is to figure out why. And why and what else are going to be your biggest, most important questions in your sales process you can ever learn to ask. Because the why they're trying to solve it is going to tell you what they really need. And you being able to tell them that you've done it for somebody else in some other way that's bigger is the way that you get them to expand how they think. Otherwise, you're an order taker and a pixel pusher, right? Otherwise, you're just that person that they're telling what they want. Like, you're not McDonald's, right? They're not just rolling up and telling you, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, right? Like, it's really about you having when you get into negotiations, about the power dynamic, right? And if you're showing up, understanding their problem better than they do, you've now shifted the power dynamic a little bit. But that comes from you understanding their problem better than, not in an arrogant way, better than they understand their problem, but in a creative problem-solving way of asking enough questions to help them realize that their problem is bigger than they first thought it was. And so you're not telling them it's bigger, but you're helping lead them to the place where it's bigger. Has anybody had experience doing that? Can anybody talk about an example of that, where they help their client think about something bigger? Anybody? Bueller?
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I had every time that I meet with a client for a 30-second commercial, video production-wise, they're always trying to fit 100 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound bag.
Mm-hmm.
So they put too much, they want too much. They want to tell everybody the world of what they're doing. And so what I try to narrow them down to, hey, why don't we just go ahead and do a 60-second spot for your website, and let's get 3 items you want to make sure are on the 30-second.
Mm-hmm.
So now I've just upsold them from just one 30-second spot that might be $1,500 or $2,000. Now it's $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a different way of looking at it. But now most people will say, oh yeah, I need a video on my website.
Yeah.
And 60 seconds to 90 seconds is fine. There's no time limit.
Well, and it's about many of the clients don't realize that if they don't have a video on their website, that they're not competitive with their competitors, right? And so that's what your job as designers is, to know what makes them competitive, like knowing their business as well as they know their business, right? The way that you sell value to a customer is to understand business. And that's why it's so important for all of you to run your businesses well, right? How can a business trust you to make their business better if you're not running really good businesses? When I first started in recruiting, I wasn't running a very good business. And I had a client that got really angry with me because I wasn't invoicing on a regular basis. And he made me cry. Like, he yelled at me because I was sending him an invoice late and asking him to go ahead and pay it. And he's like, it's not my fault. You're not doing your business well. And it was the best lesson I ever got from him, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm not taking my business seriously, so why should my customer take my business seriously, right? And I find that many of the designers, and one of my designers that I've been coaching for years, we did a little bit of this process in a class that I taught. And I had everybody go home after the first session and look at their money from the year before. And he went back through the year before and he realized he'd left $15,000 uncollected with one of his clients, right? He'd done all the work. The client had received all the value. He had invoiced it, but the contact had left. He had not had his contract clean, so there was no signed agreement. Now the contact doesn't work there anymore, and he can't find anybody to pay him. And then he's busy, and he doesn't have time to chase this money down, and now it's 6-9 months later. Now we're in a new fiscal year. Now he's got to write off $15,000. What would you do with $15,000, right? Like that's not pocket change. And it was a giant wake-up call for him about how sloppy he was being with his business and how he needed to step up his game if he wants to grow this year, right? He's got some big plans for how he wants to grow this year. But he realized he can't grow if he can't manage what he's already doing. And so now he's looking at his internal processes to make sure that he collects his money, right? And getting really clear on this intention around he deserves to profit, and he is most responsible to himself. Before, what he got into was a client was in a hurry to get a project done, right? And the reality of that is when the client is in a hurry to get a project done, that's your best chance to charge the most money, to get your contract signed as fast, to get an advance payment fast. Like they're desperate. They need you, and they will hurry anything up to get that to you. But if you go ahead and jump in and start delivering, then they're going to let you jump in and deliver, right? And they're not going to do their part and get their part clean. And so it was that was an interesting lesson for me, right? Like how easy it is just for that to get out of control really fast. So don't do that. How do you think about money? Like when you think about source of money, your source for money, is it hard work? Do you have any connection to some spiritual? I always tell people, and I don't mean this in a preachy, I have a very soulful spiritual life, right? And I don't mean this in any preachy way. I'm not telling you what to believe. I believe all my money comes from a source bigger than me. And as an entrepreneur, I've had to get really intimate with that source because money is the scariest part. Like the consistency of money as an entrepreneur to me is one of the hardest things to sort of make peace with because there's a little bit of ebb and flow and unpredictability and sometimes just sheer luck, right? Sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's just sheer luck. Same thing with jobs. When you look for a job, half of it is your effort and the other half of it is a job opened at the right time for you, right? And it's the same thing with clients. They show up sometimes from magical places and sometimes they show up from really hard work. And it's always a mix. But for me, source of money is a very spiritual thing, and I stay really connected to my money mindset because if I'm anxious about money, it feels to me like I repel money, right? Things that should happen don't, right? And so I'm always in this very zen place about money. And so for yourself, some of you, how do you like, we talked about a little bit earlier about how you learn to negotiate. Where did you learn about money? What did your parents teach you about money and where money comes from? Does money come from hard work?
Yeah.
Yes. Hard work.
Dedication.
What's that? Dedication.
Hard work.
What else?
I've heard the saying, it takes money to make money.
Yes.
So invest in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing your worth.
Knowing your worth. Okay. Commitment. Okay.
Being able to ask for it,
Mm-hmm.
when a lot of people don't ask.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So then the next question is why do you want to make money? So what do you do with the money that you make? How many of you want to own a home soon? Huh? Yeah. So travel? Yeah, I make money to travel. That's my whole reason to make money. I make money to travel.
Not worried.
Not worried. Security, comfort.
Take care of our loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this why right here, we always have to think about who in our why, right? I have a sick mom right now. One of my big goals for the year is I want to buy one of the condos. I live on a floor where there's like 4 condos around me, and it's like I want to figure out who on my floor near me is going to move, and I want to have enough money to buy their condo because I want my mom close to me but not in my space, right? So those motivations help us make decisions about money too, right? I had one of my clients I was working with negotiation stuff on. He was looking for a job, and he did the whole, like, I'd really like to make 100, I think his was 135, but I think I'd go down to 120. And I'm like, well, let's talk about what you do with that $15,000 you just compromised on like that, right? How would you spend that $15,000? And he thought about it for a minute. He was like, well, my kids really want to go to Disney. I'm like, okay, so when you go into this job negotiation and they're trying to get you to go from 135 to 120, I want you to imagine having to go home and tell your kids they can't go to Disney. Right?
Boom.
Because that's what that is,
Motivation.
right? It's not just a number on paper.
Sorry guys.
There's,
Sold out.
what's that?
Sorry guys, you sold out.
Nikki's not on our plan.
And that's where you having a real clear picture about your why on what it is that you want to make becomes really important, right? Because if you're clear on your why, then you know why you're not going to compromise. Same thing for your customer. If you're clear on their why, if you're clear on their source, what's their budget? What buckets do they have? Sometimes they tell you don't have any money, but I can tell you that if they really want what you're offering, they can find the money. Typically speaking, there's a budget from somewhere they can move it around from. They can reallocate it. Same thing on a salary, typically. Sometimes a bigger company will be like, nope, this is our bucket for that position. We don't compromise on that. But in a smaller company, they'll like, well, that's not what we wanted to pay. But it's like the example I gave you about the creative director, right? That guy didn't think he could afford $100,000 for a creative director. But when it came down to this guy or not this guy, he found $15,000 and it was a good investment. And so you understand their source and their why, right? And then you can talk about the what, right? And that's and that when we go back to the sort of different ways you can make money, right? When you're thinking about how much money you want to make, what is that money, right? And like, is it, so if it's 100K and it's 10K projects, right? And again, these are just numbers for you to play with. You play with your own numbers. Then you start thinking about where would I find that money, right? Who are the kinds of clients that would do that kind of those kind of projects? And it changes how you look for work. You're not just waiting for somebody to come to bring you work. Now you're thinking about who are the people in this market that have those kind of projects that will pay me that kind of money. Or if you know you want to make $50,000, who are the people in the market that pay designers at my level $50,000 doing the kinds of things that I want to do, right? And so you become very clear on what you're looking for so that it's not just like sort of the happenstance of this might come along. So you take a little bit of the luck out of it and make it more of a skill. And one of the really fun ways to think about this is, anybody know the Japanese ikigai? Has anybody ever seen that? It's a 4-circle Venn diagram, which is really the magic of anything, right? Anything with a Venn diagram makes you look smart. But, see if I can draw it correctly. It's a really fun way to figure out sort of where your sweet spot is. So thinking about what it is that you love to do, what you're good at, what you get paid for, what you could get paid for, and what the world needs. And so this is a really fun way. Right here is like the magic spot for thinking about new kinds of projects. In this place where what you love, what you get paid for, and what the world needs is And the reason this spot is the sort of happy spot or the magic spot is because sometimes you're not yet sure you're good at it. You think you can do it, but you're not yet really confident that you can do it. And so the what you love can be things you love to do for fun, like if you're really into the outdoors or you're really into, I don't know, music or like things that aren't necessarily what things you would normally associate with your work. And then the paid is like what are all the job kind of titles you've had and things like that in terms of, it might not even be within the field, right? It might be things you've done before, like while you're getting into the field. So maybe you have a lot of experience in customer service, right? The first job I ever had in recruiting, I got because I had a design degree. I'd done a ton of customer service in college, and I could multitask because at the time I was working in a motion picture film lab, and I was chasing film all over the country, right? And somehow all those things came together and said to them that I would make a good recruiter. And it became, suddenly now I'm on a new career path because I've put all of these weird things I'd done in the past together, and it made me good at something else, right? And so that's part of the paid piece. And then what the world needs is, what are the trends you follow? So what are the things in the world, in emerging trends and emerging markets that are really interesting to you? Maybe it's AI, maybe it's automated cars, maybe it's virtual reality or clothing, maybe, yeah.
Economy.
Economics, yeah.
I love watching where the world's going and every country's going, just to kind of evaluate where I can position myself for the future.
Right, absolutely. What are some other things that you're paying attention to out in the world right now? What are some trends you're seeing? Robotics, exactly. Is that something that interests you?
Yeah.
Okay, and are you using that somehow in your work?
I don't think I am.
Okay. So I would encourage you to think about, because it's emerging, there's money being put into it. Like even if it's, I heard a talk a while back, the inventors of from way back, I have one, Zumba? The little vacuum cleaner, is that what? Roomba. I was like, what is my vacuum cleaner called? The Roomba. I went to a talk in Boston a few years ago, and the woman who invented the Roomba was talking. And now they're inventing some crazy robotics out in, for space. They've gone from the vacuum cleaner to something out in space. And so I also at that same conference got to meet the woman who founded Zipcar, right? And so paying attention to, and the AIGA conference is one of the really great places to see what people are doing. I saw one of the AIGA conferences I went to, I saw the Segways. Before Segways were even on the market, I knew they were coming. They did one of the conferences in Denver years and years ago. They talked about biomimicry when nobody else was really talking about biomimicry, and this idea that you can look at nature and then design things around how they're done in nature. And so putting yourself into situations where you're really paying attention to what are the next trends. So you're taking your clients there, right? That's one of those value add things for yourself in terms of how do you help your clients see what's coming before they have any idea it's coming. It's just like talking about, if you don't have a video on your website, you're now way behind, but making sure you always know what that next thing is, right, for your customers. And the way you do that is that you figure out what you're passionate about, and then you find your customers around that, right? Who needs to know about robotics relative to design, right? And then you can start to think about, it gives you a creative place to think about where you're going to find new customers, rather than going after the same customers everybody else in the room is going after, right? Because you have unique interests, you have unique skills and experiences that they don't have, and then it's a way to sort of separate yourself, raise your value because your niche just got smaller, right? The fewer people you're competing with, the more valuable you are. And because where you commoditize is where you're doing something everybody else in the room can do. And the more you can micro niche and the more you can, it's why I was doing the talk before on name your niche, which is where I was using this a lot, is this idea that when you're niched, when you have a really clear specific market that you're working with and you're really good at it, you don't have to work as hard selling, right? You're not having to convince people why, and you're not competing on price as much, right? So I always tell people as a recruiter, I was the only recruiter who'd been an AIGA president in Atlanta, right? Gave me a huge advantage when we were talking about senior level creative positions, right? I'm not recruiting off of LinkedIn and a database. I'm recruiting off relationships. And I know these people, and I know what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and we can make informed decisions about both. And that allows me then to charge a premium price. I was also one of the only retained recruiters in Atlanta. I only worked with clients who paid me up front. And people would say, I don't work with, in fact, the client who hired the creative director, the first conversation I ever had with him, he was like, I don't work with recruiters on retainers. That's silly. There's enough recruiters not to have to do that. And I was like, well, I only work with clients on retainer. So I wish you well, and have a nice day. 2 days later, he called me back. He's like, okay, everybody I talk to tells me I've got to work with you. So how do we make this work, right? He became my best client for over 7 years. I grew him from 0 to 35 people. I made a lot of money. And I eventually stopped working with him because he got a CFO who's like, why are we paying you on retainer? We don't pay anybody else on retainer. And I'm like, it's because that's how I work. And he at that point decided that they would just bring it in-house. But we had outgrown each other, and that was okay. It was a 7-year relationship. That's a pretty good client relationship, right? Your average clients are going to last 2 to 3 years. You have to plan for the attrition. If you have employees, your average employees are going to last 18 months to 2 to 5 years, right? Like it's people make transitions, and you have to always be planning for that, right? Your clients are never going to leave you at the most opportune times. They're always going to leave you at the point that you're like, oh my God, I wasn't planning for that. So that you've always got to have this sales cycle of what's next. And the way you always have a sales cycle of what's next is you're constantly paying attention to what the market needs and lining that up with what you're really passionate and good at. And knowing where your place in the market is and who your competitors are, your specific competitors within the market are. And you're not ever, how many of you work outside of Las Vegas? Anybody else working with clients outside of Las Vegas? And are you doing that mostly virtual, or do you, okay. Yeah, I mean our world is all virtual now, right? My coaching clients are all over now, and I just Zoom call with everybody. That was really hard for me to get used to. I like being in person. I'm here with you because I like this. But it's not efficient. If I'm only meeting in person with people, it's not efficient, and it's the same thing for you. What else? Let's talk about, you guys want to talk about some sales? What time is it? All right, 6:30. We got about an hour. So I'm going to give you some really specific sales and negotiation stuff. Does that feel like a good thing? All right. Does anybody proactively sell? Are you proactively selling?
I'm yes and no. I'm
Okay.
about to go full press.
Okay. Full press. I like that. All right. So when you depend completely on word of mouth referrals, you are limited to the work that will find you. And certainly your SEO and all of those things are, and being out, your content you create and all those things help you attract people. And if you're really clear in your messaging and you're really clear in your niche and you're really clear, you'll attract enough people. Word of mouth referrals are great from the standpoint of that you tend to have some kind of common relationship that anchors from a credibility and And I think an integrity place, right? Your customers are less likely sometimes to cheat you if they know that someone else is going to know they cheated you, right? So I'm not saying word of mouth referrals are not good. I'm saying they're not enough. And so the proactive sales piece to me is the piece that most designers are missing. And it's the piece that is keeping design firms very small, and it's keeping designers in very limited careers. It's in the intention of who do you want as a client, and what are the projects that you want to do that you really get to start growing and owning your own destiny. And going back to some of the goals we set before, so if you needed, and again, these are just numbers, so is this number bugging anybody? It's not too big of a stretch for anybody that you're like, no way? Okay. So we're going to say 10 times 10K projects, okay, just to keep it simple. Now, I'm gonna help you figure out how many prospects you have to have this, and then you can do your own math when you do your own numbers, right? This idea that at any point in time, you're going to have about a 25 to 30% close rate at every stage of the sale. And if you track it for yourself, you can start to figure out what your actual close rate is so that you know how to factor it for yourself based on your own sales skills. But we're going to factor it on 25% just for the sake of that, right? So if you needed 10 clients and we factored on 25%, how many, so for clients, in order to close a client, you gotta have meetings with clients, right? So in order to get 10 new clients at a 25% close rate, how many meetings do you have to have? 40, okay? And you're going to start to see why I want you doing bigger projects. Because if you cut that in half and you got to have 5, then you got to have 20, now you got to have 80 meetings, right? So the bigger your projects, the less on this number. Now, if you need 40 meetings and you're closing at 25%, how many phone calls to get to those meetings do you think you need? Right? So you need 160. And these are phone meetings, right? These are meetings that convince somebody to let you come meet with them. Right? 15, 20 minutes on a phone call to try to get somebody to have a bigger conversation, right? Either in person or on the phone or on Zoom or whatever. So these are 15 to 20. So now if you're closing this, somebody's going to have to actually help me with this math because this is a different number than I had before. What's 4 times, 4 times 160, hold on. I should have gone with my original numbers, but for some reason they were different.
640.
All right. So 640 is the number of prospects you need. So this is the number of potential customers. You don't have to know anything about them yet, but this is how many potential people you can find out in the world that could use your services.
Overwhelming.
A little, right? And it's not like you have to have those tomorrow. But the idea is that you want to start working now to build a database to know your market, right? So you figure out what your market is, where your niche is, where your micro niche is, where you're a specialist. And then you start trying to figure out where 640 people might be that might hire you to do that work, right? And
And then also understanding how long your sales funnel is. If it's like for instance, maybe for me, a client may not be thinking about a video just yet. It might be a 3-month cycle.
Yeah, and the average sales cycle, and the bigger the project, the longer the sales cycle, but the average sales cycle at this price point is going to be somewhere between 3 months to 18 months, right? The bigger the bigger the project gets, the longer the sales cycle, right? Because they're not going to rebrand every year. Like a bigger rebranding project is only going to come around every 5 years, maybe more, right? And so some of that is then you start looking at what is the cycle of how often they do whatever they do, right? And a website is going to get redone, every 3 years, probably 2 to 3 years, depending on how complex the site is, right?
And what Google is doing.
And what Google's doing, and like all of those. Product development, it's like how often do they launch new products, right? What does that cycle look like within their industry? And so that's where you have to get really knowledgeable. And that's why it's helpful to have a niche, right? Because if you have a niche, you don't have to know everything about everything. You have to know everything about your niche. And you can have 2 or 3 niches so that you're, just like an investment portfolio needs to be diversified, right? But you start initially with one and get to know it really well and figure out who all the prospects are within one. And then you can start to develop other ones that balance that one, right? So once you figure out the sales cycle of one niche, then now you need to find another niche that has a different sales cycle or a different slow time, right? If this sales cycle is typically really slow every summer, then you need to go find another one that's not slow in the summer, right? And then, so you're always looking for how is it that I'm keeping everything in balance so that I'm not at the total whim of whether or not this particular market is thriving and successful. If your niche is banking and it's 2008, you just lost your whole niche, right? Like the banking industry fell out. So you have to have another balancing industry. Of course, 2008 is not a great because everything fell out in 2008. But you have to have that sort of balance to what it is that you're doing. What do any of you have niches now that you are specializing in?
I have actually 3.
Okay.
I work with businesses, churches, documentaries, and feature films, so it's 3.
Okay.
Documentaries and feature films are the same, but churches are a demographic that nobody really goes after in the video production world.
And the big churches have the money for it, right? Because they have to have it.
Yeah. And it's about their messages. I mean, I worked with Creflo Dollar Ministries for 2 years, and then they freelanced with me for, like 5 or 6 years remotely. And there's so many churches around the world that are doing little video message opens for all of their series. And they also need graphic designers.
What are your specialties? Those of you who have businesses.
Well, of course, here, hospitality,
And anything specific within that you work in? Is it event focused? You said.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
There's an act coming in.
Okay.
For a concert. Or a comedian coming in or something. Sometimes we'll have an ad that needs to.
And you're doing that print and digital? Are you doing it for social media and things like that too, or what is it?
Sometimes.
Okay. Okay. What about you?
Not necessarily industry specific, but web design, e-commerce, marketing.
Okay. And do you have any trends at all around industry? Do you have some, like I have most of my customers, or a grouping of my customers are the same, or is it really everybody's different?
I go off referrals, so
Okay.
it's kind of random.
Who are your referrals typically? Are they other clients or friends or?
It's clients.
Okay.
Usually, yeah.
And so their referrals are not tending to be industry specific at all?
Sometimes they are, other times it's a completely different industry. I've done stuff with someone selling filters, like air filters
Okay.
online,
to somebody who has a preschool.
Okay.
So
Is there sort of an industry size? Like, so in the industry size, it's like there's small cap, mid cap, or large cap companies, right? So they tend to, where do they tend to be financially in there?
small.
Okay. And so that becomes part of your niche, right? I work with small cap companies, small businesses, and then you start to figure out what it is that is unique about how, like, the commonality of the customers that you have. And you'll find, I think, if you break that down, that you do have a niche. You just haven't necessarily maybe defined it. Yeah, yeah. Same thing. It's like gaming and hospitality might be a little big, but then figuring out, like, what is it that I'm specifically doing so that I become narrower in the way that I talk about that, so people are more specific about what it is that I do and who I do it for. You were going to say something a second ago?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say the company I work for, well, you might guess coming from Silicon Valley, I work with a software company,
Mm-hmm.
and they are a civic tech company that makes waste management apps for government.
Okay.
That's kind of what I've been starting to specialize in.
Okay. Yeah. That's definitely a nice market to be in, right? And this fits for you as job seekers too, right? It's not just if you own a business. When you're looking for work, while it's a different formula, you still want to be thinking about if I want to interview with 5 companies before I make a decision about where I'm going to work, then you can apply this formula and get to how many companies you need to start out with as a list. When I've done work with students just looking for work, a lot of times I'll say, just build a list of 200 companies you might want to work for, right? And in doing a list that big, you now have to expand outside of the normal list. You guys probably have a list of companies here that everybody knows. Like, I was looking at where everybody's worked, and it's like MGM, and like it's all the different resorts, and so there's sort of a pattern probably to where a lot of people think of about working, and sometimes you just need to think a little bit bigger, because sometimes there's companies here that you weren't paying attention to when they moved here or when they started, or we get a new corporate headquarters in Atlanta just about every day, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I didn't know they were here. And so staying on top of what's happening in your market and who the new companies are, who the new agencies are that started, and who their customers are, right? Who are big design agencies here? I saw Wheat is one, right?
R&R partners?
R&R Partners. Is that related to, we have R.R. Donnelly in Atlanta. They're not the same, right? It's not connected to them? Okay. And then do you have a lot of small design agencies? Little boutique? Yeah. Okay. And so just having a constant inventory for yourself of where all the potential customers might be in the market and outside the market, right? So there's always the local customer, which is easier to access, and then there's the industry focus around who your ideal customers. And companies will still always have a preference for people that are local to them. I mean, they're either local or they have some other connection, right? Typically, it's hard just to go cold call Nike and get work out of Nike, right? Like, or Target or some of the bigger companies, because they're working with people. Target's primarily working with people in Minneapolis, unless there's some other connection to somebody, right? Procter & Gamble is working with agencies mostly out of Cincinnati, right? So it's figuring out, like, what are those strengths where you can leverage what you have by being where you are, and then leverage relationships you have. All of you are on LinkedIn? Are all of you active in terms of maintaining your network there? Okay. I would recommend that, if not on LinkedIn, somewhere, right? And I also really recommend, if you're going to do this process, any of you do you use a CRM?
No.
Okay. I'm going to recommend that if you're getting ready to, full court press sales, you got to have a CRM.
Database. I'd probably just use Excel.
I will have a different conversation with you.
Sure.
Excel is great for your first inventory of where you might, like, when you do that list, just getting to a list of 640, Excel is great. The minute you start trying to call people and keep track, Excel will make you, Excel, Google Sheets, whatever will make you want to hurt yourself, and I don't want you to do that. So there are lots of inexpensive and free CRMs. That's actually going to be my next blog post because it keeps coming up. But you can Google free CRMs, and there's all kinds of them. I personally use one called Zoho, which is about $350 a month. I mean, $350 a year, and it's got Zoho One has where you can collect payments, and you can DocuSign stuff, and it has this whole suite of apps that you can use that I love. So everybody can pay me through it, and just puts everything in one place. But if you're not going to be collecting payments from clients, then something as simple as, I'm trying to remember, there's, I don't know. What's that? HubSpot's a great one. HubSpot integrates the content piece of it really, really well. So if you're creating a lot of content to try to highlight your expertise, then HubSpot is a really great one in terms of being able to track how people are interacting with your content. How many of you are creating content on your website or otherwise to tell the world how you think and what you do? Anybody? Are you? Tell me a little bit about that. What are you doing?
Well, I'm working on my portfolio.
Your portfolio, okay.
So I'm making pieces that I think my future employer might like,
Mm-hmm.
they might need, and I work for them.
Okay. I'm going to encourage, actually, if there's any other students in the room too, I'm going to encourage you to find real projects rather than make-believe projects on that too. So nonprofits, small businesses, and do projects that have some kind of real-world application rather than just spending your time making something up. Because as those of you who are already in business know, that the real parameters of the real world force you to be extra creative, right? And I just think people want to see stuff that has a more of a real-world application. So even getting an internship or something like that with somebody rather than... I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of new designers make is that they sit at home in a bubble and they create a bunch of projects, for make-believe projects for a portfolio, and you lose some time when you could be out in the world really gaining some experience. And so I'm actually, this is a really good point here, and it's good for everybody. So how many of you know about informational interviews? Anybody ever talked to you about informational interviews?
Is that just like a fact-finding meeting?
A little bit. It is not a I want a job interview. It is a I want to know how you got to where you are interview. And it is all about the person you're interviewing, almost as if you're going to write an article about them. And you really could turn it into that kind of content project, right? One of my friends in Atlanta, David, good God. Sorry, David Laufer, past president of AIGA, just wrote a book in the last few years, published a book in the last few years, I think it's called Aha. And it basically was he'd collected stories when he was a young designer coming out of college years and years ago. He was interviewing with people like Milton Glaser and all of what are now the famous, Massimo Vignelli, all the really famous designers. And he did this collection of stories from all of his interviews with those people he kept a notebook, and then he published the notebook. But they basically were all informational interviews of those times where he just went to them and asked them about their careers and how they got to where they are. And he used that to help find his own path, right? So finding out why people are doing what they do helps you figure out whether or not that why resonates with yours, right? And then you start to figure out what their steps to get to where they are. If you want to own an agency someday, then you need to be talking to agency owners and figuring out what they learned. We talked about mentors earlier, right? And so it's a great way to then identify who your mentors are, your potential mentors. And that's one of those places where it doesn't have to be in your market. That's one of those places where your AIGA connection helps you. And I'll tell you, I'll put a plug in for the board. When you're on the AIGA board in any state, then or any market, you have access to other board members in any other market. And as members, you do too, but there's another elevation of it. I get people to respond to me because I was a past president for AIGA Atlanta, right? So it's one of the benefits of the membership in this community. But being able to figure out who the movers and shakers are in this particular kind of niche that you're interested in, which is why you need to figure out what those niches are, then you start to figure out sort of what does that path look like, and how can you grow, and what can you do differently than what you're doing to make more money doing what you're doing. And if they're in a different market, they're more open to telling you things because you're not necessarily competing with them, right? And so it just opens up. But as a student or a new grad, it's a phenomenal way to stumble upon opportunities without seeming too forceful, needy, pushy, right? Because you're just curious. You're just interested. And everybody likes to talk about themselves. But you make it about them. It's not about showing them your book. You might have some samples in case they ask, but it's really not about you presenting yourself to them. It's about you learning from them and asking them questions. And you can turn it into content in a research project that then may pull people to your site in a more inquisitive way. So, yeah. All right. So, what else? Oh, on the sales cycle. How many touches do you think it takes for somebody to buy? 3 if you're lucky.
Yeah.
3 is actually the number of times, the average number of times that people make sales calls and then give up, right? That they call somebody 3 times and then they figure they don't want to buy from them, right? The actual magic number for the person buying is 7. So if you're giving up at 3 and it's taking 7, how much are you leaving on the table, right? So what you have to assume, and it's the same thing in the job search, you never want to, there's always a balance, right? You never want to be a stalker. You never want to be somebody who is intrusive. But most of the time somebody doesn't respond has nothing to do with you, right? They're traveling, their inbox is full, they meant to get back to you and they forgot. I tell people all the time, if I don't respond to you and you need me, just text me. I'm more likely to respond by text, but you can't you're not texting a prospect right out of the gate, right? But I tell the people that I know need to reach me, I'm the head of the student board for AIGA, and I just have this ongoing thing with them because they'll do these emails and these group me chats, and I'm like, if you need my attention, you just text me, and I will respond. But I've got 4 email addresses and and I've learned that with AIGA boards. I'll email to say I'm coming to a city, and then it goes into some ether somewhere, and then I'll have to follow up again, right? And I don't take it personally. I can't take it personally, right? Everybody's busy. So I think one of the most important things you can remember about this process is that you're probably giving up on sales prospects before they want you to give up on them, right? And so force yourself. How much time do you spend on sales in a week? Curiously. Proactive sales, calling people that don't know who you are. Is that a big goose egg?
1 hour.
1 hour. I'm going to challenge you, if you do nothing else, try to add 1 hour a day. And then try to grow it to 2 hours a day. And the reality is if you're in business to make money, you need to be doing a 50-50 on sales to delivery. Half your time needs to be on sales. And then you get busy and you need to hire people to help on the delivery stuff that's below your pay grade, right? But one of the biggest mistakes I see designers make in sales is that they sell for a while and they get busy. And then they stop selling, right? And then now they don't have any work, and now they sell again. But if you've got this 30, or if you've got a 90-day sales cycle and you didn't sell for the last 90 days, now you got 90 more days till you're going to get more work, right? Or you're going to take some really low-hanging fruit. But for ideal projects, right, if you're selling all the time and you're keeping your 90-day sales cycle full, then you're not having those mood swings that make not wanting to be in business, or make being in business not fun, right? Because nobody likes those periods of time where you wonder how you're going to pay your bills if you're in business for yourself. And so the trick on that is to have consistent activity, even if it's only an hour a day. Or, worst case scenario, you're doing 2 hours every 2 days, right? You really can't. And one of the things that I've learned through the years is you have to time block on your calendar. Sales has to be as important on your calendar as the client work you schedule, right? And if you have to move it because you have a deadline, you move it but don't delete it, right? So if you had an hour scheduled for today, but your client's on deadline and you got to skip it today, now you move it to tomorrow. So what does that mean for tomorrow? Now you do 2 hours tomorrow, right? And there's a really, this has worked really well for a lot of my clients. As a schedule. So Monday, you figure out who you're calling that week, and you email them to tell them you're going to call them and to give them the opportunity to schedule with you. If you don't have a scheduler or something like Calendly or something like that, you can give them a link to something like that. And then you set up times on Tuesday and Thursday, and you give them an option for PM Tuesday or AM Thursday, right? In that 1 hour block you have, you say to them in this email, I have time between 9 and 10 3 and 4 on Thursday or Tuesday, and 9 and 10 on Tuesday or Thursday. And if I don't hear from you to schedule a time, I will be calling you during one of those times. I will try to reach out to you one of those times, right? So if you don't have these times, people scheduled in these times, then you use that time to do outbound phone calls, right? So you either have somebody scheduled for 15 to 20 minutes, or you're calling them. And then you're using Wednesday and Friday to do whatever sort of follow-up you need to be doing, right? So it might be you need to send out some materials to somebody, or you need to follow up with somebody you talked to that didn't respond from the week before. Or so you're keeping a list of those 7 touches you need to do, and you're filling in these hours, and you're knowing at the beginning of the week, you're planning, what are you doing with this time, right? And the only thing that makes that shift is if one of these people schedules time. But everything else is you have it planned for outbound calls. And you get back to that goal of, I need 40 meetings in a year, right? And again, that was, so on those numbers we came up, which I took down, those numbers we came up with before, we got to 360 prospects, 160 or 640, and then we had 160 phone meetings, right? So that's 160 meetings over 12 months. It's like 10 meetings over 10 meetings a month, right? Phone meetings. And then 40 by 12. So that's like 3-4 meetings. So a meeting a week is all you're doing, right? And so you're getting to that place where then your meetings are in here, but you have your sales times figured out on your calendar in advance and blocked, and you know this week I'm going to do 5 hours worth of sales, or I'm going to do 10 hours worth of sales, and you have this really, you have a system for yourself so that you're not having to decide in the moment what you're going to do, right? Because that takes time. You waste sales time if every week you have to figure out what you're going to do. Whereas if you just have a system for how you're doing it, then it makes it a little easier to be consistent with it. Does that make sense? And it works for job search too, right? You just set yourself up a schedule. I'm gonna look for a new job. I mean, if you're not working right now or whatever, it's like you're 40 hours a week looking for a job. How do you want to spend that time, right? And it becomes about being really committed to a schedule with it. So.
Question.
Uh-huh.
So is that generally people that you are already in contact with? They contact you?
No, this is generally, this list right here on a Monday is totally new. And you may be pulling people in here and here that you've talked to before. But this and these are really scheduled for new outbound, trying to get to your ideal client, right? And some of your best sources for research, if you're not using it, that's where LinkedIn is really valuable. You can figure out what a title, what the title is, the ideal title of the ideal customer for you, and the ideal company. Do the research on the company, find then who in that company has the ideal title. So it might be a creative services manager or a creative director or a marketing director or marketing manager. And once you figure out what that ideal title is for you, then you're just searching LinkedIn for everybody in your market with that title and figuring out how many of those fit with what you want to work for, right?
So what you're saying is that's how you search for potential clients. So that I like microbiology. Just as an
Yeah.
I find it interesting. It's awesome.
That goes back to what you love, right? Yeah.
I want to work with more microbiology stuff or more like health related stuff. How would I go in?
So go into LinkedIn and just type in microbiology and see what comes up.
That, and then just find the head person.
And then once you
message
figure
them.
out, and then you start looking for who has the title in those companies that you might want to work for. Yeah. I know, it's.
How do you do your own, or what do you say?
Well, so you do some research with them, right? Oh, yeah, thank you. It's a nice segue. It's 7:15, so we've got time to cover this.
And that goes back to the informational conversation.
Yeah. So the first conversation, the first call you make is basically this is who I know you to be. This is what I do. I think there's an opportunity where we could work together. Can I schedule a phone call with you for about 15 to 20 minutes to determine whether or not my assumption about this is accurate, right? And so you're just asking them to commit to a little amount of time to just share information with each other. If they have a need, they're going to say yes immediately. If they don't, they might refer you to somebody else. Oh, that's not me. You need to talk to so-and-so.
And one of the lines that I used to use is, I would actually put this in the letter saying, I'm not looking for a job, nor do I expect you to have a job. This is purely for information. I want to learn about so-and-so or whatever the business is.
Yep.
So they know the expectation is information, not a job.
And in the early stages, while you're figuring out whether or not there's opportunity there, that's all it is. In the product development space, in the startup space, there's this idea around customer discovery. And if you approach sales as customer discovery rather than you're trying to sell them something, all you're trying to do is to figure out if there's a problem they need to solve that you can help solve, right? And so in the early stages, you're just curious. You're just curious about whether or not, sort of how they're getting their work done, right? And if they'll talk to you about that. And so you can even position it like, I'm just trying to see if there's even a market, right? I have this love for microbiology, and I think there's an opportunity there for a designer to be of value. And I'm trying to figure that out. Would you spend 15 to 20 minutes on the phone with me talking about how you get things done from a communication perspective, right? And so as you start to develop some language around that, then you have something else you can say in terms of, like, once you know there's a need in the market, Then you can have a more specific conversation of, do you have that need? But in the initial stage, you're trying to figure out what is the need in the market that you want to serve, right? Does that make sense? And this is a really good place for this. So, every opportunity you have to solve a problem for a client starts with the fact that they have a pain. You hear it all the time of like, what's keeping them up at night, right? And the pain is usually related to a strong emotion. Often it's a fear if they don't get this done that their job's on the line, or a fear if they pick the wrong person, their job's on the line, right? Fear. It's often a fear-driven pain, but it also basic fear, mad, sad, happy, glad, right? Emotions. But you're looking for, do they have a pain that they want solved pretty quickly, right? And if they have a pain, what are the problems that are causing that pain, right? So their website's out of date, and they're losing credibility in their market because their website's out of date, right? Why is their website out of date? And then you start to, the why gets you to the problem, right? Once you figure out what their problems are, then it's about which of those problems can you solve and are you best suited to solve, right? And then you're offering them solutions. But if you're going in and talking to them immediately about what your solutions are, what it is that you do as a designer without understanding what their pain and their problems are, then you're selling to them before they're ready to be sold to, right? It's only when they believe you understand their pain and their problem that you have a right to talk about the solution that you offer. And it's when you do that, then you get to that value sell versus the hourly rate sell, right? When you understand the pain and the problem and why they have, then you understand what the value, right? What's the value of this pain and problem to solve? What's it costing them not to solve it, right? And that's really more important than anything, is that in sales, there's 3 competitors in every sales process. There is hiring somebody, doing it themselves, or doing nothing. Your worst competitor is them doing nothing, right? It's not them hiring somebody else. It's either them trying to do it themselves or them doing nothing at all. And most opportunities, you'll think somebody else got it, but it's because they just decided not to even solve the problem, right? Because there's not enough cost involved to not solving the problem. For me, in the recruiting space, it's like people leave job positions open for 6-9 months sometimes. I had a conversation with a company that had been without a creative director for almost a year, and they didn't want to pay me a retainer. They were like, we'll let you know if we get desperate. I'm like, how is not having had a creative director for a year not desperate? But, they had figured out how to hobble along long enough without a creative director. It wasn't a pain they needed to solve immediately. And so pain, problem, solution. So the solution is sort of the what, right? The what and the how. But the benefit is what you're really selling, right? And that's when you get into the value. So you tie that then when you're selling to them, the way you get the higher prices, the way you get to not being commoditized, is that you've tied the benefit you're selling into them to everything that you've learned about their pain and problem and how much they value that. And when you can talk to them in those terms, they hear their own words back, right? And they feel like you understand them. And you're bringing extra value because you're hopefully bringing in experience from other customers of ways you've solved that problem in other ways for other customers. And you're giving them new ideas in the process of this benefits. But when you're selling to them, you're never telling them how you're going to do it, right? You're just telling them what you're going to do. The how is your secret sauce. The how is the thing that they get when they hire you. But somebody's going to ask you for a proposal, and they want that proposal to tell them how you're going to solve their problem. And then they're going to take that proposal and they're going to go to somebody else and say, can you do this for me cheaper? Right? So the last thing you ever want to do is to spend hours putting together a proposal for somebody and letting it land on their desk and either be handed off to a competitor or not. You've wasted your time doing anything for them at all.
I work at companies that have spent hours on proposals or 20 hours and the companies end up going to somebody else. So it's true.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time because they're 20 design hours and then whoever writes stuff up changes.
Yeah. And people think they have to do it, right? And the companies tell you you have to do it. And you know, it's always a judgment call on your part, right? You have to do whatever you think you're going to do, but the number of times it works out in your benefit. Usually by the time somebody does a request for proposals and there's multiple companies bidding, they already know who they're going to hire, and that process is simply to figure out how they can drive that company down on price. Can they bring enough people in on the proposal process to then drive the company they want to work with down on price?
So then you shouldn't be going after companies that put out proposals, and that's what you're saying.
It's a collective industry thing. As an industry, and it happens every now and again. It happens a lot if somebody asks for spec work. Design agencies in a market, when asked for spec work, will oftentimes talk to one another, and they'll collectively say, as AIGA designers, we don't do spec work. And so we are not going to respond to this proposal in this way. This is what we could do, right? And they give back an alternate option. I personally, when asked for proposals, tell people, I am happy to negotiate with you what it is that you think you need, and then to put the agreement we come to into writing. That's different than a proposal, right? A proposal is you want me to go away and do a bunch of thinking for you and then to send it back to you. And I'm not willing to do that. But if you're willing to sit down with me and walk through this process, then I'll deliver to you an agreement that we came to and work from there, right? And you'll find out very quickly in that process whether or not that company is really serious about working with you. I had somebody that wanted me to do a proposal, and I had this conversation. He's like, well, I just want something from you so I can compare apples to apples. I'm like, but I'm not an apple, right? I'm a pomegranate. Like, I was like, you can't compare me to other recruiters, because I was pitching a candidate experience process to them that was different than a recruiting process. I'm like, but what we're talking, I'm not going to give you my thoughts on that in a proposal so that you can either do it for yourself or give it to somebody else to do, right?
So would it be fair to say that as a company, if you give somebody a proposal, and a lot of times in those proposals, they're asking for your ideas of how you're going to fix the problem and solutions. Is it fair to say that they're just trying to steal your ideas?
They are. It's called braid picking. Yep. And so that's where if you can get in your mind that you never give away your how, right? You like if somebody's asking you how you're going to do something, you're like, that's what we do together in our working process, right? And so if you'd like to pay me for a discovery process and bring me in on a strategy perspective, then I'm happy to work with you on a strategy perspective. But if you're only going to buy my strategy, that's more expensive than if you, like strategy alone without execution, right? You're front loading all of my work because the thinking is what you're paying me for, right? And that's where you move from pixel pusher to strategist as a designer, right? And that's the evolution for you as a designer is there's an element of learning your craft and getting really good at your craft early in your career. And you're a little bit of a pixel pusher, right? You're just learning how to be really good at all the things that make design good as a craft. But over your career, you're going to have to evolve, and you're going to have to learn some things like how to be strategic and business focused with your clients, Then you're going to have to learn how to manage people so that you cannot do work that is below your pay grade, right? And that's how you grow to be able to have a sustainable business versus a freelance practice. It's the moment you can get to that place where you're able to get big enough projects that you can bring people in under you and manage them and get paid for other people doing work. Now you've got a business that doesn't solely depend on you showing up and putting your hours in, because your hourly rate can only escalate to a certain point. We're not lawyers. People don't like to pay designers $600 an hour, right? And so the only way that you grow in that kind of exponential way is then you got to start getting to that place where you have people working under you, where you have a markup on their work, right? And then you create sustainable businesses. And on that, I think we're at time. Just really quick before I wrap, I just want to say, so this is what I do for a living. If any of you would like to have conversations about how I can help you with your businesses or your careers, happy to have those conversations. I've got some time tomorrow. I'm still here. Midnight tomorrow night. So I have all day tomorrow. I am going to be at Art Institute at 6 talking to Art Institute students. But other than that, my day's pretty open. My business cards are up here somewhere. And if you give me yours and have some time tomorrow you'd like to talk, or any time in the next week or so, I'm happy to do. I always offer to the folks that show up a free consult, 15 to 20 minutes on the phone. And I'd love to learn about your businesses in a little more detail and see if there's ways to work together. No pressure, no. We can go through the Ikigai process if you want and really help you figure out what your niche is. It's usually a good way to spend that time. So, yeah, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
And then